everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The World of Sharks, a podcast all about sharks, rays, and the ocean, brought to you by the Save Our Seas Foundation. I'm your host, Isla, and every episode I sit down with experts in marine science, conservation, education, and storytelling to take you on a deep dive into a different part of the wonderful world of sharks. Today's episode is the last in our little South African mini-series. We started with Pippa Ehrlich, filmmaker and director of the award-winning documentary My Octopus Teacher, and we're ending with another award-winning filmmaker and marine conservationist, Craig Foster, who you might recognise as the main protagonist of My Octopus Teacher. But today, we're not talking about the documentary, but the very special place in which it was filmed. A place that Craig has spent his entire life exploring, documenting, and sharing with other people. As you'll hear, it's a habitat that means so much to Craig, and it's one that he has a very deep understanding of and a very deep connection with. I am, of course, talking about the Great African Seaforest. This is the only forest of giant bamboo kelp on our planet, stretching 1,000 kilometres from the shores of Cape Town in South Africa to the coastlines of Namibia in the north. It's famous for the towering thickets of kelp that sway with the motion of the sea and harbour an astonishing diversity of life, from tiny invertebrates like nudibranchs to great shoals of fish and many species of shark and ray, all of which we'll be talking about. Kelp is not only important for these creatures, but also for us, for humans, as it stores carbon from the atmosphere, protects us from storms, and, as Craig will explain, is a very important part of our heritage. I've been lucky enough to explore this place myself, and even got to go for a dive with Craig after we recorded this podcast. And as Craig describes here, it really is like being able to fly through the canopy of a forest, and it's just such a magical experience because there's so much life supported by the forest, and you just feel very much at peace while you're there. But at the same time, you also feel like a big kid in the best candy shop ever, poking into all the little hidey holes, seeing all of the creatures that are there and just gliding between the kelp stipes. It's an absolute dream. One of the many reasons why the Great African Seaforest is so special is that while sadly many kelp forests around the world are suffering, this one seems to be thriving. That isn't to say there aren't threats to the sea forest, there are many. And that's why Craig has devoted much of his life to telling people about it and encouraging its protection. This is why the Sea Change Project was created. Co-founded by Craig and Ross Freinlich and led by a team of passionate scientists, storytellers and conservationists, it aims to raise awareness of the importance of the sea forest and the life within it through storytelling based on science and direct immersive experiences. Their work includes films, including My Octopus Teacher, books, exhibitions, impact campaigns and scientific research. And this now also includes a project funded by the Save Our Seas Foundation, 1001 sea forest species, which Craig is leading with another member of the Sea Change team, marine biologist Janis Lanshoff. Much of the inhabitants of the Great African Seaforest, and even the forest itself, have never been studied. Craig and Janis hope to change this using a combination of research and science-led storytelling to bring more people into the world of the sea forest and encourage action to protect it. In this episode, we talk all about that and the Sea Change Project, as well as explore the sea forest itself. Craig has spent many hours tracking and learning the language of the ecosystem, and he talks us through many of the species that can be found there, including sharks. We also talk about his life and how the ocean has been a constant feature throughout it, and why the ocean is so important to him, and why he chooses to immerse himself in cold water every single day. This is a really special episode with someone who speaks so incredibly thoughtfully and openly about their relationship with this amazing blue space that we are so lucky to share. I feel very fortunate to have been guided through a small part of this very special part of the world by him. and many of the little trinkets that he found for me on the seafloor, including an urchin exoskeleton pierced by an octopus, a cuttlefish bone, and some discarded shells, sit on my desk as a reminder of that time. I would highly recommend you listening to this episode somewhere cozy or even outside with your eyes closed and imagine yourself weaving through the kelp fronds, watching the fishes go about their day and being carried gently by the swell. I hope you enjoy this one. Without further ado, let's dive into our episode. Hello, Craig Foster, and welcome to the World of Sharks podcast.
Wonderful to be here. Lovely to meet you, Isla.
Yeah, it's so nice to meet you as well. I've heard so much about you. All good things, all good things. We are right beside the ocean that you get to go into every single day. So it's a really special thing to be able to come and meet you in person and be very close to that amazing environment that we're going to talk all about today. I'm really, really excited. But we like to begin and end every podcast with the same question for every guest. For you, I know every experience in the ocean is memorable for different reasons. But I wondered if there was one in particular that stood out for you.
I have had, so many incredible experiences. But when I listened to your question, because it's a world of sharks, one thing just popped out from, I don't know why. It's not necessarily the most powerful, the most interesting. But many years ago, I was fortunate enough to do some diving off the east coast, further up the coast here at a place called Alawal Shoal. And we spent, I think it was a month or more, every day getting taken out with a boat and dropped, I think it was about 7 to 10 kilometers offshore. Wow. And then we got to almost every day dive with this group of tiger sharks. And there was quite a strong current, and we'd float for 10 kilometers in the ocean with these incredible animals. And they were huge. I mean, they're at first incredibly intimidating. Mm-hmm. They were all females, but after a while you realize just how extraordinary they were and how they weren't interested in, they were interested in us, but they were not interested in harming us in any way. Mm-hmm. And some of them had 14 plus remoras on them. They looked like these giant galleons moving through the ocean. Mm-hmm. And just to be intimate in that intimate space with those animals, up to 10 of these massive sharks. Mm-hmm. It had such a profound effect on me that at night, before I went to sleep, I used to have these sort of almost waking hallucinations of being back in the water with these animals. Wow. And they were just so big and so gentle and so powerful. And then sadly, I heard not long after that experience, some of the fishermen took out most of those sharks. It was just heartbreaking. Mm. But the memory of diving with them stays with me, and just their size and their grace, and just being alone, because the boat used to leave us and then come pick us back up, and it was just the most incredible experience. And they were, which is I think still such a mystery, is they would sometimes like to make physical contact with us, but gently. Okay. And I've noticed that with quite a few species of sharks, even though they have no parental care, they, not being cuddled or nurtured in any way when they're young, yet they come often for human touch, which is, obviously not all sharks, but certain individuals. And these animals were doing this of their own accord. And it was quite mysterious, but incredible. Yeah.
So you mean kind of like rubbing against you, yes, or letting you put your hand?
We'd obviously, I wasn't trying to make contact with them personally, but they would come up and they would rub against, and it wasn't like a mouthing or anything like that. It was really interesting. Yeah, and then I experienced the same thing in the Caribbean, and here as well. Sometimes the animals will come and make contact. Yeah,
I think that's the most special thing, is when it's on their terms.
Oh yeah,
and they're coming to seek you out rather than you trying to initiate that kind of contact.
Yes.
Yeah. And I completely resonate with what you say about having an animal as large as that, and especially, a predator, an animal that we're taught from a young age to fear or to see in a negative way, just going about their daily life. You're not a big part of, I think a lot of humans imagine that when you drop into the sea, all of the animals, or all of the sharks especially, turn around and they go, oh, are humans here? And in reality, you're just not really on their radar at all, and you're able just to observe them in their natural environment. And I don't think anything can replace that feeling of just being a privilege to be part of their world, even for a short space of time.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Pishy tiger sharks have quite a big prey base, but it was very clear they were not interested in us as food in any way.
And I've heard that, we hear that a lot on this podcast, of a lot of people who have had these really profound experiences with sharks, not necessarily because, the sharks are inquisitive or interested, it's just being around them. They're just such an incredible animal to be around. You have a very, very deep connection to the ocean. But I was interested in, has that always been the case? Has the ocean always featured in your life?
It always featured. I grew up in a little wooden bungalow, which was actually, part of the house was below the high water mark. So, most of my early life was literally living in the intertidal zone. The waves used to smash the house down quite often. So it was very intimate, and every day I used to be in the water. I started diving when I was 3 years old. So that I've always been close to it. And then I've worked throughout Africa, in deserts and all sorts of places, but I've always had that pull to come back here to the ocean throughout my whole life. But it was about 12 years ago now where I decided to really intensify that love, and I decided to go in every day for 10 years, but I think it's been now 11 or 12 years, almost pretty much every day. Wow. So it's just, for me, the more I've got to know the sea forest and the environment here, the more it excites me and the more I'm drawn to it. So it's, even if I'm sick, which is very seldom, because the cold seems to improve one's immune system a lot, I would still go in. Maybe not for very long, but just that commitment every day to go in. And so it's not difficult. It's almost like I find it hard sometimes not to go more than once. So sometimes we're doing 2 or 3 dives a day if there's time. I
was going to say, do you feel a bit off if you haven't been in the water?
Definitely. It's a massive, especially in winter, in False Bay when the temperatures are colder, it has quite an effect on one's mental state. So you feel very different if you haven't gone in.
Have you ever lived away from the sea?
Years ago, I don't know how many, 30 plus years ago, I lived in London for 1.5 years. That was extremely difficult for me.
I can only be in London for like a maximum of 3 days and then I need to leave. But you also typically dive without a wetsuit and very minimalist gear. And when you consider, a lot of our listeners are from all over the world. And you mentioned earlier that the temperature here can be anywhere between 10, 12 to 16 and over, which is typically cold, or seen as cold. Why do you prefer to dive this way?
I like the feeling of the water on my skin. So I like to feel the kelp on my skin. I like to feel those tiny shifts in temperature, because when I'm tracking underwater, sometimes I'm tracking animals by using temperature. So it's much easier to feel that. But the main reason is that the cold water changes your brain chemistry quite dramatically. There's an enormous increase in dopamine and adrenaline and noradrenaline. And that makes you feel very good. And it kind of sharpens the mind, so it helps the underwater tracking. And the cold stress improves your immune system dramatically. So, I mean, after a while you can spend quite a long time in the water without getting cold. So it's almost like having a kind of a wetsuit, but it's underneath your skin, and you can move much faster without the wetsuit. Although I think the new wetsuit technology is pretty good these days. But I much prefer the intimacy. So what I'm trying to do is get as close to this environment as possible. Even if I wear a rash vest, I can feel that separation. So I'm trying to get as close to these animals and this environment without disturbing them as possible. And I find that easiest when I have the least amount of equipment, the smallest camera, the smallest little light, and just a very basic equipment.
You got a lot more freedom that way, rather than being encumbered by, when you're diving, sometimes in cold water, you've got a dry suit on, or you've got the BC or your torch and all of these things hanging off you, and that can be quite distracting.
So I'd rather actually, I can, after all these years, go for a long time. But even if I was, sometimes if I haven't slept well, if I have a physical injury, it affects one's ability to thermoregulate. And then I've got far less time in the water. But I'd still prefer a shorter time without the wetsuit than a longer time with the wetsuit. So even if I'm scuba diving here, I will try, if I'm feeling strong enough, to go without the wetsuit. But I'm mostly free diving.
Yeah. Do you have any, so say for someone at home who's listening who maybe wants to get into that practice, do you have any advice for them when they're first starting?
Yeah. The idea that the trick is to try and remain very calm, even though your body's going into an environment where it can be quite a dramatic feeling, especially if you're not too used to it. So the idea is to keep calm, breathe very gently, so that you get all these wonderful chemicals like the dopamine and the adrenaline, but you don't spike the cortisol. So if you get nervous or the cold feels overwhelming, then you will increase your cortisol levels, which is not ideal at all. You don't want that. That's not very healthy. But what is interesting is if you can learn to be calm in the cold, then if you have other stresses in other parts of your life, you can keep the cortisol down. So it's a very powerful way of being calmer in life. So what I would suggest is that people take it very slow and easy. Don't push it. I've pushed it in the past, and then my immune system hasn't been able to take it, or I felt actually not good. So go in for just a few minutes at first, especially if it's very cold, and very slowly increase that time based upon how you're feeling and how much you've slept and your mental state. It's a slow game of slowly increasing until you start to know your body, know your mind. And then the brown fat heaters will slowly start turning on, and they will increase. And then you'll find after a while, you've got this incredible system that allows your body to regulate in the cold. And it's a really fantastic feeling. There's enormous benefits to people think, oh, I'm going to get cold, it's not going to be pleasant. But you learn to love the cold. You crave the cold. You know, in summer here, sometimes it's very warm weather and the ocean can get a bit, you know, warm, and then I crave the cold, so I've made an old ice box from a deep freeze, and I go into the 0-degree water just to get my little cold fix. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's almost addictive. I think it is addictive.
You've mentioned already underwater tracking, and the Sea Change project combines underwater tracking with scientific research, filmmaking, storytelling. But I first wanted to go back to the basics, and I wondered if you could explain to our listeners what underwater tracking involves and how it's informed your work.
Great question, yeah. I mean, I had the privilege in my 20s and 30s to work with these incredible master trackers in the Kalahari, these San master trackers. And it was just extraordinary to see how much information they could extract from a landscape where I could see almost nothing. And there weren't any animals, but the stories of the animals were written everywhere. So when I started this intense diving 12 years ago, going in every day, after about a year or so of doing that, I started to wonder, would it ever be possible to do any kind of tracking underwater? But it seemed absolutely impossible. Everything's moving. You know, something makes a mark on the sand and 2 seconds later it's washed away. And I kind of gave up. And then I saw a trail on a rock. And it was a slime trail of a whelk. And the sand had collected on the trail, and I could follow that trail to the animal. And I thought, oh my goodness, you know, there is an example. And from that moment, literally, like every day since then, I've seen more and more and more and more of these underwater tracks that seem initially invisible. And some of them are incredibly subtle, but there are thousands of them. And they can inform me and give me an enormous amount of information about what's happened in the night before, what's happened in the days before, and even can predict what's coming in the future. So there are thousands of little marks on shells, on the kelp, on the sand, on the rocks. They're kind of artifacts of the past that kind of can tell you about of what's happened. So often I'll go on a dive and maybe not even see that many animals, although here it's hard not to. I mean, they're just thousands everywhere. But the really interesting stuff often I can see through the tracks. And if I hadn't taught myself this underwater tracking, that would be an invisible world to me. So, I mean, I've got a few little examples I've pulled out so I can actually show you. So this is a helmet shell. And if you can see that tiny little hole there, that immediately tells me that an octopus has killed that animal. This is also a helmet shell. Can you see how much? It's like, 10 times thicker than that one.
Yes.
So this tells me that this animal grew up in a highly volatile environment, and this grew up in a calm environment. So same species, but they look utterly different.
Yes,
so it's telling me about the environment as well.
So why is that? Is that just because it needed more protection? So it's developed a thicker...
Exactly. So the big wave takes that thin shell and rolls it, and it'll crack and die. Whereas this has got this incredible armor and will survive.
Amazing.
So they literally, I look at that shell and I can see its early life was highly constricted, and then it moved into an area where it had more space, and that's why it grew conical there and out there.
For listeners who are, this is for audio purposes, the shell that Craig's describing there, it kind of looks a little bit like a sombrero, almost.
Like a hat, exactly.
So it's got like a sort of narrow bit at the top and then like a big brim around the bottom.
This cuttlebone, I can tell, has been predated on by quite a serious predator, and it's managed to escape and then fix it and then it died later. We can go sometimes back. This is a 5 million year old fossilized shell. Wow. That tells me a lot about the coastline at the time. Mm-hmm. It's very, very different to the coastline now, and much higher up. Mm. So, literally, there are just tracks everywhere, not only telling you about the animals, but about the climate before, about prehistory. Mm. It's almost like you're going into a kind of, it would be like going into a cave and being able to look at all the archaeology and see what happened in the past, but from 5 minutes ago till the deep past, 5 million years ago. And that's what the underwater tracking does. We also track in the intertidal. That's obviously the place where, the high tide comes and then leaves at low tide. Mm-hmm. Yesterday we found a fantastic track where these extraordinary marks were printed on the rock coming out of the ocean and into a freshwater pool higher up. And they were ink tracks. So because of our knowledge and the style of tracking, we immediately knew it was a Cape clawless otter. And then we had to figure out if it had killed a cuttlefish or an octopus or a squid. Mm-hmm. And based upon the ink and the trail, we worked out it was a cuttlefish, and the prints were made by the otter, but it came from the cuttlefish's ink that it collected on its tail and on its body. Mm. And it was marking the rock with this cuttlefish ink. Mm-hmm. So we get fascinating examples like that I almost feel because I'm trying to project my mind into the tracks, I almost feel I saw that predation. Mm. But I wasn't there. I was there, probably about 8 hours later. Mm. So it's a very powerful way of getting into nature. Mm. This looking at the tracks and projecting your mind into these very subtle marks and reliving the experience.
Yeah, almost kind of like forensics.
Very much like, it's very much, that's a great analogy. You like a detective of the wild.
That's a very cool job title, Detective of the Wild. And thank goodness that otters are such messy eaters. Anyway, dropping the ink everywhere. But yeah, it's very, I can imagine it's a very immersive experience, almost like learning to read a new language.
You're absolutely right. So I'm glad you brought that up, because it reminds me that in my mind, I think in some ways this tracking is the oldest language in the world. So our species, Homo sapiens, is 300,000 years old. I'm almost certain that our early hominid ancestors tracked as well. So we're looking at a language that is millions of years old, spoken by our species. Every wild child before agriculture was fluent in this language. Sadly today, especially our children of today, cannot speak any of this wild language. And it's the oldest language on earth. So part of our job at Sea Change is to try and bring that language and that connection back to people.
Because you're very inspired by the ancient human cultures.
Very much so. That's my other big passion, is human origins. And I work with an incredible scientific team who've done incredible work here on the caves just up the coast.
Yeah, there must be just so much to uncover still, and so much to learn. And there's a lot of people now who can't imagine life without the internet, so without looking up things before you've seen it, whereas not even that long ago people were learning about nature just through observing, just through being outside, just through finding things and being outside every day and seeing those patterns and starting to piece the puzzle pieces together. And I still think the ocean is one of the few places that you can still you can still do that because you can't take your phone into the water with you and take a picture. And there's the thing you can do now where it's I've forgotten what it's called, but you can send the picture straight to Google, and Google will tell you exactly what it is within seconds. Whereas you can't do that in the water. You have to, observe, take notes, go back, look through books, see what it is, or even through your own exploration, as you're talking about, try and figure out what that story is or what it's telling you. And the Sea Change Project aims to protect South Africa's marine environment by making the Great African Seaforest an icon, or telling people just how special this environment is. And for anyone who is unfamiliar with this environment and the huge diversity of life that it supports, because I went for a 20-minute snorkel the other day and we saw so many species in that time. It was just mind-boggling. Can you tell us why it's so special?
Sure. I mean, I'll try and go for a very short version because I don't really know where to start there. But I think what is so unique about it in many ways is this is the place, this coast, which has this almost 1,400 kilometers of kelp forest, is the very place where our species work up to our humanity. What we're finding here is the first art and the first science at 100,000 years old. Incredibly complex chemistry and artifacts and an entire symbolic material culture. And in essence are the first books and first computers on Earth, discovered by our African ancestors at this incredible time period. And these people lived in close proximity with the ocean. And I believe, and there's nice anecdotal evidence to suggest, that this place here was the place where we first swam and we first dived as human beings. Because this environment was absolutely perfect for this flourishing of the human spirit, and because it was so abundant and so biodiverse that we had enormous time to innovate. Survival was so easy. They probably needed 1 hour a day to cover all their food needs. So all the rest of the day was open for innovation. So we've got this incredible relationship with this coast that goes back to the beginning of the human mind as we know it. So it looks, in the archaeology, it looks like we woke up in a serious way at about 100,000 years. And all the innovations that happened then are what we see today with all our technology and everything come from there. So we incubated in Africa for 2/3 of our time on the planet. So every human on Earth is intrinsically African, but are intrinsically connected to this kelp forest, this intertidal, this coast. This is where we roamed in this time that changed us more than anything else. It might be even more radical than the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, this incredible symbolic revolution, where for the first time we recorded information outside of the human brain on pieces of ochre. So it's just got this incredible heritage. And of course it's got this tremendous diversity and biomass of life. Because we've got all these nutrients, we can have this, it's an incredible sort of evolutionary memory of where we've come from. And we've got all these extraordinary animals that we've had relationship with for so long. To add to that, you've just got a three-dimensional environment. That's what's so amazing, as you know, about the kelp forest. You go down there and it's this giant underwater forest with animals living in all levels of the forest. And you can fly to the top of the trees, you can go to the bottom, you can go through cave systems, you can go through tunnels if your breath is good enough. So it's like being on a forest in the land, a misty forest on land, but you can fly. And there are just so many more animals than any of the forests on land. So it's an exquisite space, and the leaves of the kelp are floating on the top. So you get these incredible shafts of light coming through the holes in the leaves. It's like being in a magical underwater forest.
That's such a good way of describing it. I'm going to have to steal that because it is completely true. It's just like you're able to fly through, weave through all of these the great big kelp stems. And when you're down at the bottom, one of my favorite things to do is to kind of roll on my back and look up, almost as if you're lying on your back and looking up at a forest canopy. And you see just all of the life that depends on not only, you take a kelp frond and you can see all the tiny, like you say, all the tiny little signs of life, even if it's not actually there, and then do the same thing at the roots, and everything's different. It's a really, really special place. And of course here, as you say, hopefully in a little bit we're going to get to go for a dive together, which will be amazing. And now I'll be able to think about all of that, not only the biodiversity but also the cultural heritage as well. I think that's a really cool thing to think about. But what kind of species, I know I'm not expecting you to list everything, but what kind of species might we expect to see in the sea forest?
I mean, what is exciting is that we've got incredible invertebrate life. So the invertebrate life hasn't changed that much in over 100 years. So when we look at the invertebrate life, we're looking at a near pristine scenario. Sadly, a lot of the reef fish have been hugely diminished. So that's sad that is the case. It's mostly due to overfishing and pollution and so on. But all we have to do, because the environment is so intact, if we just let them alone for a while, they would reproduce fast. We've got incredible crustacean life, amazing crabs, lobsters, that kind of thing. We've got fantastic shark species, ray species. We've got fabulous cephalopods. I mean, I call it the octopus village here, because there are so many octopus, sometimes living very close to each other. They're quite tolerant of each other. Incredible cuttlefish. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And we're continually finding new species and fascinating new behaviors. And the interaction between these species is obviously, there's very little known even about the species, let alone the interaction. So there's more than there are lifetimes of work to be done here.
Yeah, everything's connected though. Everything will be depending on each other.
Exactly.
Yeah, and because this is a sharky podcast, the world of sharks, can you expand a little bit on what sharks we might find here?
Sure. So our smallest shark is the puff adder shy shark, and it's got this beautiful colouring and pattern on the skin that looks a bit like a puff adder, as in a snake. That's why it's called the puff adder shy shark. That shark is only about 50 centimeters, half a meter long at full adult. Then we've got dark shy shark, which is a little bit bigger. We've got a leopard cat shark, which has like leopard rosettes. We've got the pyjama cat shark. These are all the small sharks that live in the forest and like to be in tiny little caves, and they're sometimes even sleeping together, some of the species. They're quite social in that they will, sleep together. The pyjama cat sharks will hunt together. And as you get, and the pyjama cat shark's only about 1 meter at full, maybe slightly bigger at full adult. Then you get the gully sharks, which is they grow up to about 2 meters, and they now look like a what people might see as a classic sort of shark and maybe be scared of, but they're totally harmless. And they gather in groups of I've seen up to 70 animals in a group, mating congregations and so on. Then the larger sharks, we get the smooth hounds as well. We get the bronze whalers, which are a little bit bigger. We get, of course, the white sharks, although there are not many in the bay at the moment, sadly. We get a lot of rays. We've got this incredible animal, the short-tailed or giant short-tailed stingray here, which is, I think, the biggest stingray in the world. They get up to 4.5 meters. Saw one just the other day, absolutely, they're magnificent creatures. So, I mean, that just gives you a rough idea. I mean, there are quite a few more species, eagle rays, all sorts of other skates, but that gives you a rough idea of the animals we see more often than others.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, even I was astounded because, obviously coming here, I had on my list of things I wanted to accomplish this year is to see different species of shark because, I'm very familiar with the ones that we have at home. And I wasn't expecting to get in the water here. I thought I'd have to work a bit harder. You have to work very hard in Scotland to find the sharks. And literally within the first 4 minutes, we'd found a pyjama shark, which was extremely exciting because I've never seen one before. And I didn't realise they actually got to be I know they're a small shark, but I didn't realise they actually got to be that big.
Yeah, they're sturdy, a sturdy animal. And then, of course, I forgot the 7-gill cow sharks, which grow up to about 3 meters. They're magnificent, ancient animals with these big eyes. They're fascinating. Fortunately, the orcas have chased them off our usual spot at the moment, but hopefully they'll come back.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So to go back to the Sea Change project, how did that come about?
So when I started intensely diving every day, as I say, 12 years or more ago, it's slowly that process and the stories that were coming out of that got certain people interested. And a group of people that were just fascinated slowly asked if they could join me in the water and understand some of the things you and I are talking about, like the tracking and so on. And they ranged from marine biologists to filmmakers to conservationists to storytellers. And for quite a while then they volunteered, I think for almost 5 years, just to work for free because they're just so passionate and they loved this so much. And we had these incredible experiences together, swimming almost like a pod of aquatic primates. And it was a very powerful experience. And out of that pure love and passion for the ocean, this Sea Change project and the not-for-profit organization kind of naturally just came into being.
And your aim is to tell the story basically of the Great African Seaforest through various different mediums.
So our initial aim was to try to get the Great African Seaforest as a global icon, because we knew if it had a name and it was known, it would be far easier to protect. And we thought that would take a long time, but because our film, My Octopus Teacher, did so well, that basically catapulted the Great African Seaforest into this global picture in a very short space of time. So that was very exciting. And then now we're building on that by telling, because what we've realized is psychologically, like we literally, our our psyches and what we do and our choices in life are made by the stories that move us most powerfully. We literally are made of the architecture of stories. And depending on the story you believe and feel close to, that's how you will interact with the world. So we're trying to change the current paradigm where obviously, we are not, we're not supporting our great mother in the way that, a child would like to support a parent or a mother. So we'd love to change that paradigm and find a way for all of us to have a different relationship with the wild. And we're not trying to say that we are any better or worse than others. I think we all lead contradictory lives to a certain degree, but it would be great. And I think that's the exciting thing about working with Save Our Seas, is that you can just feel everybody at Save Our Seas loves the ocean and loves the wild and nature. It's so obvious. So it's just so easy. It's just passion. We're working, and the passion, just each side of the of that coin drives it together so beautifully. So we're trying to look to collaborate with like-minded people and organizations like Save Our Seas, and because it's gonna be obviously a massive group effort. We'll just be a tiny cog in the wheel, but I think we have enough of those cogs. I think we've got there's hope.
Yeah, and as things always are, because you need all different to put all the puzzle pieces together and to solve a lot of the issues that are facing our oceans as well. You need all different aspects of the coin. So we need the science and the research, but you also need the stories that are going to connect people with that environment, because people aren't going to be interested unless they have that emotional connection. That's what we're all looking for.
Exactly.
And I think also that's something that we're missing a lot, especially in 2020 when my Octopus Teacher came out. A lot of us were in a very scary place. The world it was very unfamiliar for everybody. Everything was changing. There was a lot of uncertainty, and I think a lot of us looked to nature to help us with that, for the first time, not just from a perspective of, oh, what is that species over there, or I'm going to go for a run. It was on a much deeper level, and I think my Octopus Teacher resonated with a lot of people because of that.
So I'd just like to add, I think,
yeah.
So even though storytelling might be the sort of focus, a lot of our work is, in science and in indigenous knowledge, in tracking, and in direct one-on-one learning from wild animals. So if we combine all those things together, that science and the ancient arts, that's what we find is a sort of magic key to unlocking that door of the story that will appeal to people. So that's what we're working with.
And that is what your latest project funded by the Save Our Seas Foundation, led by yourself and Yanis as well, which aims to chronicle 1,001 stories of the species living within the sea forest. And it was inspired by the famous ancient tale 1001 Arabian Nights. And would you mind telling this story for our listeners? And I was interested to know how it inspired the project.
Yeah, sure. So Yanis heads up our Sea Change Science Lab. He's a wonderful and very talented young marine biologist, and we were trying to figure out, we'd had this extraordinary experiences together, and with the rest of the team as well, and we were trying to figure out how to best communicate this to a larger audience. And we came up with the idea of could we actually tell 1,000 stories, and could we find 1,000 species in the kelp forest? And then Swati came up with this idea. She's our conservation journalist and my wife. Why don't you have a 1001? And she told us the story, which she was very familiar with. And it's a story of, it's deep, it goes deep into the origins in Asia and in Arabia, of this king whose wife betrayed him, and he was so incensed that he beheaded her. And then he got into this terrible state of mind where he kept marrying a woman every day and beheading her in the morning. And it was this terrible cycle of destruction, much like the situation we are in with our planet at the moment. Yeah. And then this extraordinary woman came along and married him, and instead of the beheading, she told him the story, but left it on a cliffhanger. And he thought, I'm just going to wait one more night. And she told him another story and another cliffhanger. And this went on for 1,001 nights. And he was so transformed by the love and passion of these stories that he completely pardoned her. And was sort of lived happily ever after. So the analogy is that we would like to tell the stories of these incredible animals so that all of us can just walk far more lightly on this planet and care for them and look after them, and obviously, support the life support system that keeps us all ticking and remember where we come from and who's actually in charge, and that our economy is a dependent of Mother Nature. We are a fragile little child, totally reliant on her. We were all born wild, and we are human animal, and we're not separate from nature. We are completely woven into the architecture of the wild, even though if we don't feel that, we actually are. It's impossible to be disconnected, even though one might feel mentally like that. So it's about that deep reconnection, and also the hard science of these animals' extraordinary lives and how sometimes very, very difficult it is for them to get to adulthood. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I really love that. I love the story behind it and what you're aiming to do, because I think a lot of people see science as very dry sometimes, and the kind of emotion is taken out of it. And I can say this as a scientist, we're not very good at tapping into that side. And I do think we need to, like the two work extremely well together. And I did, when I was doing the research for this episode, I did read that the Great African Seaforest is actually growing. Is that right?
There is some literature that seems to suggest it's growing, but I'm not entirely. I think it's more stable myself. When I look at the forest I know, it doesn't appear to be actually growing. It's actually diminishing in some places and growing in others. And when I see, sometimes we have these warming events and I see the forest struggling a lot, and the cold comes back and then it regenerates. It's fairly stable at the moment, which is good. But it's a very fragile ecosystem, as you know, only second to coral reefs. They're one of the most fragile ecosystems on Earth. So it is kind of terrifying with the warming oceans, what could happen. But we are very fortunate. It's one of the healthiest kelp forests on the planet.
Yeah. I was going to say it's a rarity to hear that, because everywhere else in the world seems to be, especially kelp forests, things like seagrass beds, we're losing them at a really alarming rate. And you mentioned the warming seas, but are there any other threats facing the kelp forests here?
Yeah, I mean, there lots of threats. We've got, pollution problems, we've got overfishing, we've got poaching. It's just, there are these multiple threats from all over the place. People trying to survive, wanting to extract the kelp even itself. And that's what I find, it's not often just one thing, it's these multiple, often small threats that add up to a lot when you combine them. And there's only so much an ecosystem, even an ecosystem with this much, it's got a lot of resilience here, an enormous amount of nutrients. But, we really need to give it a rest and let her recover.
We've talked a lot about, this human connection with the ocean, and we're both very lucky and privileged in that we're able to go into the sea every day and, see these environments. But for a lot of people, the ocean isn't accessible to them. They live in towns, they live in cities, or are too far away to get into the water. So are there any ways that they can still stay connected to the underwater world?
There are, funnily enough. You can start, if you're in the furthest place away from the sea on the planet, in the middle of one of these huge continents, for instance, you will still be relying on the phytoplankton in the ocean for breathing. So literally, every second breath or third breath you take is directly coming from the ocean. To just be aware of that is to be connected to the ocean. Mm-hmm. And then there's almost, no areas where there aren't bodies of water. And in my mind, the ocean, I see the ocean extending up all the rivers. Mm-hmm. Because that water has flowed into the ocean and is moving around the planet. It was once ocean. So there's this one body of water that's on this planet that is in the oceans, it's in the rivers, it's also in the plants. Mm-hmm. So there's an enormous body of water, giant torrents of water inside trees, inside plants, inside the soil. We're actually surrounded by the one ocean of water, actually. Mm-hmm. So no matter where you are. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't experienced that till not that long ago, when I was in a river, a tidal river, and I could feel that ocean breathing miles up the river and back, and then suddenly realized it's actually everywhere, no matter where you are. It's in the air as well. There's this massive ocean of water in the air that's connected to the salt ocean. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you swim in dams, in lakes, in rivers, you can connect with that. Mm-hmm. It's obviously much easier if you're next to the ocean, but it can still be accessed. And I'm sure there's many other ways, but those are the things that just came to mind right now.
Yeah, good things to even just think about, and also vice versa as well. So the things that you're doing, even if you live, hours away from the sea, they will eventually reach the ocean. Exactly. Yeah, so things like getting microfibers off your clothes, that eventually ends up in the ocean. Your rubbish, whatever you're recycling, whether you're recycling it well, all of these things make a difference. And sometimes when I feel a little overwhelmed, I like to remember that fact about your breath. So every second or third breath is linked to the ocean and the phytoplankton. It helps me feel connected when I'm in the middle of London, which I find very hard. So we've come into the end of the podcast. I've just got 2 final questions. You're okay for a time. And you said before that, and in this podcast as well, that you learn so much from Mother Nature and the the animals that live, especially under the water, but just everywhere. But is there a particular lesson that you would like to share with our listeners that they can take forwards, wherever they are in the world?
The one thing that pops to mind is I've studied these small sharks that I mentioned earlier in the kelp forest, in particular the pyjama cat shark. And I've seen them laying their eggs, and I've seen that tiny shark embryo forming in that egg. And it often seems incredibly difficult for that animal. The whelks are drilling through there and killing them. The sea stars are killing them. It feels like it's a harsh world out there, full of predators. And that's the initial understanding. And that's what I first saw when I was, in the early days in the forest. But then as I got to know this system better, what I saw was an ecosystem that was just supporting that tiny shark in incredible ways. Just everything was actually supporting life and supporting that little shark. So the entire incredibly complex biological intelligence is supporting and wanting life to flourish, and is actually and the predators are there also to support that. They weave out the weak, and if a shark is, lays an egg in the wrong kind of place. So everything is actually supporting life, and that's often, as humans, we feel very fragile, we feel afraid, we feel lost, and yet we have this incredible ecosystem and this mother that is just loving and supporting us in a million ways. So it can feel, scary out there, but actually we've got these multiple levels of biodiversity, life, nature, and then a whole mysterious underlying reality that quantum physics and other extraordinary scientists are beginning to see now, also supporting this life in a way. So we've got this unbelievable life support system, and if we see the magnificence of it through nature connection, it pushes us closer to what indigenous people were feeling, that primal joy, that rapture that you sense when you feel the separateness breaking down, and you feel that connection to the wild, and you feel your wild being the heartbeat starting to beat inside. And then you feel alive, and a tremendous amount of that fear dissipates. And you can really, live as we were designed to live.
Absolutely, yeah. I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially after the last couple of years. And I love the vision of that, that little shark egg being supported by everything around it. I definitely felt that. So I came into a lot of that kind of ocean connection. I've always been very connected to the sea, obviously because I grew up next to it, but it was more of a pastime, a hobby, way to have fun, and I never really thought too much about it until my dad passed away. And then I did really struggle with a lot of feelings of anxiety and uncertainty and unsureness, and I felt very cradled by the only way I could describe it is that I felt extremely supported and very cradled by the ocean.
Wonderful.
And I really explored that, in my mid-20s. And I keep trying to remind myself of that now every time life feels a little bit overwhelming. It's like, no, you're part of this much bigger thing. And you feel very small in the best way possible. And I think that really does help you. But this has been such a fantastic conversation, and I'm so glad that we got the chance to do this in person. And we've talked about a lot of very profound things and very deep things, and it feels almost wrong to ask you the final question. But some people do find this a very meaningful question and give it a lot of thought. And other people, I had one guest on, Kieran, who said she would be a leopard ray because she wears leopard print a lot. So
That's great.
very varied question. But the final question is, if you could be any species of shark, ray or skate in the world, what would you be and why?
So when I heard you would ask that question, I remembered something that happened quite recently where I kind of just wanted to be this animal for a while. I was working with Save Our Seas in one of the remote research stations. A magnificent day, and I dived down and there was a mangrove whipray. And I approached it, and suddenly there was like this gunshot underwater. It was so loud, and I felt the vibration right through my body. And I was filming at the time, and you can see on the film my whole body like just reacting as if I'd been shot. And I had no idea what it was. And I thought, it can't be this ray. Maybe this ray, it was feeding at the time, and maybe it's disturbed a pistol shrimp or something. And it was such a loud sound and such a powerful shock ray. So I got hold of James Lee, who's your Save Our Seas CEO and a elasmobranch specialist. And I told him, what do you think this could be? And he sent me this new paper, amazing paper, science paper, on this species of ray and one other ray that can make this incredible underwater sound. And it was so exciting for me to understand the science and see what I'd experienced. And then James said he'd seen these rays doing this to big bull sharks to keep them away. Okay. And it's quite new. It's this knowledge is quite new to science. But it made me, for a moment, I'd come out of a very stressful time and suddenly was immersed in this incredible environment. And I just wanted to be one of these mangrove whiprays for a while. It was just like they lie on the bottom dead still just for hours doing nothing. Then they feed a bit. Then a shark might try and come and eat them, and then they, put out these incredible sounds. Yeah. And it's just this incredibly simple but complex life. And I often just want to be a cephalopod or a shark or a ray for even 5 minutes, just to feel what it's like to have that mind. I would give almost anything just to experience what it actually feels like. I've got the vaguest sense of this, all this big monkey mind nonsense just shutting down. When I've gone into the real cold for a long time, I find my whole front brain shutting down. And that reptilian primal shark brain in the back, just the quietness, the beautiful quietness of it, the presence, the pure presence. So I kind of imagine it's like that, like mostly tremendous calm with moments of incredible intensity, life and death intensity. That's what I imagine it's like. And then just calm and not worrying too much about the past or the future or when you're going to live or die. But just being
very much in the here and now.
Yes, and I imagine that what it's like to be a mangrove whipray, and I would part of me would just love to be that.
Was this in Daros on the Seychelles?
Yes.
Yes, I think I would also like to be there as well. Pretty idyllic. That was a fantastic. I knew you would give a great answer to that question, but that was a fantastic answer. But with that, we've come to the end of our World of Sharks podcast, and with all of this talk about the ocean and the sea, I feel very much the need to get in it now. So.
You're heating up.
Yeah. So we'll leave it there. But thank you so much for your time and for all of your very considered answers. Yeah, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Wonderful to talk to you, and thanks for all the great questions and your interesting life.
This podcast was brought to you by the Save Our Seas Foundation. It was hosted and edited by me, Isla Hodgson. Our amazing visuals were created by Jamie Silva. Our beautiful logo was made by Nicola Poulos, and the wonderful jingle you can hear right now is by David Knight. Thank you very much to Craig and his partner Swati for not only hosting us, but also showing us the beauty of the kelp forest and taking the time to talk to us in such great detail about it. We will leave links to everything in the show notes as always, but for now you can find out more about the work that they do over at www.seachangeproject.com. And as always, thank you at home for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, how about leaving us a rating and a review on your podcast app? It means a lot to us and it helps more people to find us. And if you want a topic covered, a question answered, or you just want to say hi, we love hearing from you. Please feel free to get in touch by emailing isla@saveourseas.com, or on social media. We are at Save Our Seas Foundation on Instagram and at Save Our Seas on Twitter. Alrighty, have a jawsome week and we will see you next time.